I was 35 years old, sitting at my parents' holiday dinner table when my younger sister cleared her throat and smiled. She leaned over her plate, looked directly at me, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear that being 35 and single must make the holidays feel remarkably lonely. My father laughed first, his booming voice filling the room. My mother, who was holding her wine glass up for a toast, offered her usual gentle smile and whispered that my sister was only joking. I carefully set my glass down on the crisp white tablecloth and chose to say nothing. None of them had any idea that I had not flown back to Ohio for a family reunion. I was there because 6 days earlier, a legal document had landed on my desk in Chicago bearing my forged signature. To my family, I was simply the quiet daughter who had moved away, the one who never married on schedule, and whose career was a vague topic brought up between dinner courses. In reality, I was a successful professional acoustician who designed specialized sound environments for recording studios, lecture halls, and children's hospitals across the country. I had built my own business from the ground up, starting with a single borrowed microphone and a rented desk. My family knew nothing about my real work because they had never taken the time to ask. They only saw me as someone who had abandoned the family business, leaving them behind to run the enterprise my father had built. But I had only returned to town after an old technician secretly called me to report that my father was using my original design to close a multi-million-dollar buyout deal. The crown jewel of my family's manufacturing business was a specialized acoustic panel that I had personally created over a decade ago. When I was 24, the family firm was months away from total bankruptcy. I spent an entire winter in a freezing workshop developing a layered baffle core that completely revolutionized how rooms absorb sound. I even carved my initials into the inner frame of the very first prototype I ever built. That single invention saved the entire business, brought in massive orders, and kept my father's company alive for another decade. Over the years, my father slowly erased my name from the creation, eventually calling it his own signature design. I had let it slide back then because I cared more about peace than credit. But now he was selling the company using a fraudulent document that claimed I had transferred all my rights to him. During dinner, my sister continued her subtle jabs while my father boasted about how everything built under our last name belonged strictly to the family. My mother gently nudged the conversation away whenever the tension rose, acting as she always did to keep the peace. I looked around the room at the people who had treated my life like a running joke for over 15 years. I realized I was tired of shrinking myself just to make everyone else comfortable. Looking directly across the table, I calmly stated that they did not need to worry about my personal life because I had actually been married for 6 years. The entire room went dead silent, the cheerful atmosphere instantly evaporating into thin air as my mother lowered her glass in shock. My father's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to total confusion as he demanded to know how I could keep such a massive secret from my own blood. Instead of asking if I was happy, my family immediately focused on the perceived betrayal of keeping a personal life private from them. I briefly mentioned my husband's name, explained that he was away on business, and kept my answers intentionally short to protect my privacy. My mother tried to reach across the table to smooth things over, but I could no longer be moved by soft words. I knew that the biggest secret in the room was not my marriage, but the forged documents sitting in a locking file cabinet at my father's office. I was determined to see that paperwork with my own eyes before the night was over. Early the next morning, I drove over to the company headquarters under the pretense of looking at the festive holiday decorations. The facility was filled with prospective buyers in expensive coats while my father proudly toured them through the main hallway. He repeatedly assured the investors that every single patent was fully owned by the company and properly signed over without any legal complications. I watched him sell my work as his own, feeling a cold realization wash over me. I casually asked to review the intellectual property paperwork, but my sister quickly intervened and blocked my path. She condescendingly reminded me that I had not worked for the firm in years and accused me of trying to sabotage a deal that would secure the family's financial future. Rather than arguing, I waited for an opportunity to investigate the records without raising further suspicion. A loyal longtime employee named Dale pulled me aside near the loading dock and quietly guided me into an empty side office. He pointed toward a thick legal binder that had been prepared specifically for the buyers during their due diligence review. I turned directly to the section labeled Intellectual Property Assignments and found the single-page contract. There, on the line marked for the inventor, was my full name written in handwriting that clearly belonged to someone else. The signature was a clever attempt, but the lettering was far too neat and lacked the natural slant of my actual handwriting. To confirm the fraud beyond any doubt, I checked the official date listed on the assignment agreement. The contract claimed I had signed over my rights 5 years ago during the middle of April. However, I distinctly remembered that exact week because I was in Rotterdam presenting a major research paper at an international acoustics conference. I had my passport stamps, conference programs, and hotel receipts to prove I was thousands of miles away on that exact date. Someone in my family had carefully sat down with a pen, practiced my signature, and forged my name on a binding contract just to secure a massive financial payout. I took clear photographs of the fake document from every angle before carefully returning the binder to its original spot on the table. That evening, I stood in the kitchen helping my mother dry dishes while keeping my voice as neutral as possible. I casually mentioned that I had no memory of ever signing over my rights to the acoustic panel design. My mother smiled warmly and explained that my father had simply taken care of the paperwork for me so I would not be bothered by legal details. She genuinely believed that forging my signature was just a helpful act of fatherly love rather than a serious crime. She repeated my father's favorite phrase, reminding me that the family name always came first. At that moment, I fully understood that my mother had accepted the lie long ago, choosing quiet compliance over facing the uncomfortable truth about her husband. Later that night, I confronted my father privately inside his home study while he was reviewing the company financial ledgers. I directly told him that I had found the forged assignment contract in the buyer's binder and knew he was the one who wrote my name. He did not deny the act or show any remorse, instead claiming that I had used company tools and resources to build the original design. He argued that he was simply cleaning up loose-end paperwork that I was too busy to handle myself. When I pointed out that forging a legal document was a felony, he slammed his glass down and accused me of abandoning the family business when they needed me most. My father then attempted to shift the entire burden of guilt onto my shoulders by playing the victim. He warned me that if I revealed the truth, the multi-million-dollar deal would fall apart and ruin the financial future of everyone in the family, including innocent employees. He insisted that exposing his fraud would make me the villain who destroyed the family legacy over foolish pride. For years, I had been the person who absorbed every insult and made sacrifices to keep our family dynamic peaceful. But as I stood in his dimly lit office, listening to his manipulations, I finally broke free from the psychological hold he had held over me for my entire life. Instead of arguing further, I quietly walked out of his house and drove back to the company building late that night. Using a spare key given to me by Dale, I entered the main office and located the original prototype panel mounted on the display wall. I carefully removed the outer frame, exposing the hidden inner wood where I'd carved my initials and the creation date 11 years ago. I took detailed photos of the physical proof, gathering every shred of evidence needed to protect my intellectual property. The next morning, I had my attorney send a formal legal notice to the buyers and my father's legal team, officially invalidating the fraudulent transfer agreement. The fallout was immediate and devastating for my father's reputation. The buyers promptly withdrew their multi-million-dollar acquisition offer after learning that the core patent was tied up in a major fraud dispute. My family attempted to launch a wave of angry phone calls and guilt trips, but I remained completely distant and refused to engage in their drama. I offered my father a final choice. He could either assign the proper royalty percentages to my independent firm or face a public courtroom lawsuit for forgery. Realizing he had no legal ground to stand on, he reluctantly signed a proper, legally binding agreement that acknowledged my rightful ownership and granted me my fair share of the profits. Walking away from my family was not easy, but it was the most liberating decision I had ever made in my life. I finally understood that keeping the peace is never worth sacrificing your own truth, identity, and personal self-respect. True family should lift you up and honor your achievements, rather than steal your hard work to fuel their own selfishness. I returned to my home in Chicago with my head held high, knowing I had finally stood up for myself after years of staying silent. Sometimes, the only way to build a genuinely peaceful life is to tear down the comfortable lies that held you captive for so long.